Welcome to Chart Chat. In this series, we look at the subject's chart for the first time and share our initial reactions. This is not meant to be a comprehensive dive into the chart, but rather an intuitively led discussion of our first impressions and what we know about the person already. So today we are covering the birth chart of O.J. Simpson. I believe his name is Orenthal James Simpson. So that was a first for me. He was born July 9th, 1947 in San Francisco, California at 8:08 a.m. That is his birth time as of public record. And that makes him a Cancer sun, Pisces moon, Leo rising. So water, water, fire. And I think, O.J. Simpson's pretty infamous as far as he's a well-known football player, stood trial for murder there at one point, did a little jail time after that. He's been in the headlines a good bit, I think you could say. So today we're taking a look at his natal chart. Neither Maddie nor I have looked at it before. So these will be truly first impressions. And I think the first thing I'm noticing, Maddie, is that is almost exactly where your Chiron is, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty close, right? Like those super early degrees there
Of Scorpio. Yeah.
Except he
For
has
one.
this in the third house.
Which is where mine is. I have Chiron in the third house.
Oh, so what?
Plus just how much water he has in general. Like, it's very watery.
Yeah.
Very emotional.
Very emotional, but also you got quite a bit of fire going on too, which I can kind of relate to that. I have like a lot of fire and a lot of water in my chart. And I'm like, what is this, like steam? Like what do you get when you
For
put
real.
fire and water together? And I mean, like the classic image of someone being so infuriated that they have like the steam coming out of their ears is kind of what I think about like OJ. Because
For real.
he was, I keep saying was, like he is alive, but just everything I've been watching about him and everything, he seems like he was a very intense, fired up guy.
Intense. I think that's fair. Totally. It's also interesting, you talk about like combining water and fire. Like he does have a good bit of fire, and his fire energy are in the water houses. Like he's got Sagittarius South Node, but in the fourth house related to Cancer. And then same with these Leo placements, Saturn and Pluto, but that's in the 12th house for Pisces. So even his water or even his fire placements like are gonna still kind of express themselves as water. And then it looks like his water energy is more like in his air houses. So he's got a whole thing happening here for sure.
So he has a Gemini North Node, which is, we were just talking about that.
Yeah, how would you summarize a Gemini North Node, Maddie?
Well, I mean, one of my impressions about Gemini North Node is that something you're working towards in this life is like the ability to listen and to take in other perspectives and points of view without trying to explain everything to everyone, kind of thing, or like without trying to overexert your own perspective, and like just being able to take in other perspectives and ideas and listen, because ultimately when you're a better listener, you are able to communicate better with other people and to get along better with other people. Yeah.
All of
But
that.
then I guess Sagittarius in the South Node is sort of like, you're pretty good at doing your own thing. Like you're good at doing you. And now in this life, it's not that you're going to not do you anymore, but it's that you need to take other people into consideration. And be kind of more of a team player, which is sort of funny for like a very famous football player.
Right.
I mean, it sounds like he was a really good football player. And I think that like fire energy probably served him well. in that case. Like he's the juice. He's, I don't know, good at football. I don't really know all the football terms and things like that, but he's
I don't
really
know very many. Yeah. Well, and that's interesting too, that like his Mars is in the 10th house. I wonder if that's a thing with professional athletes where that's like very much your body being connected to like your public reputation and your, I mean, I wonder for models and athletes and like really anybody who's like trading on their body, that that's their main asset. That's just a thought. And then the other thing was the Sagittarius South Node in the 4th house is very interesting because those two things at face value could not be more different. Because yeah, the 4th house part is like you were a homemaker and you like took care of everybody else and you rearranged your whole life to make sure everybody else was well cared for, and you never went out in the world because you had somebody to go out in the world and make the money and they brought it home and provided for you. Like you were very sheltered. And the 10th house north node is like you get out there and you do it yourself, you make your own way in the world. But at the same time, the Gemini part of that, where it's like you need to listen to other people, you need to take their advice, you need to hear their ideas, which definitely reminded me of when you watch the Netflix special, The People versus OJ Simpson or whatever it was called. It's like his dream team of attorneys. I mean, he would have been screwed had they not been there. And if he was not willing to, in the end, take their advice and be open to their ideas, he would have had a very different outcome, I think. From like, it wasn't his idea to hire Johnny Cochran, it wasn't his idea to try on the gloves, like on and on and on. With those people were there to tell him what he needed to know when he needed to know it, and his only job was to be open to that. So like, and look at like, it worked out pretty well for him. Like whether you believe he committed those murders or not, he did get convicted. And I think a lot of that is because when you walk on your North Node path, the universe is right there to support you and to let things work out well for you in the end. Like obviously he went through the ringer, but he came out the other side acquitted, owed some money, but that's money. That's not your freedom, your whole life behind bars or worse. Like, yeah, crazy.
I don't even know, like, because I think of, 4th house being associated with family for the most part. And that's just very interesting because I've, from what I've learned about him, it sounds like he had a really tough relationship with his dad where they just had like one argument and then didn't speak for 10 years. Like they were around each other at holidays and family gatherings and just didn't speak for 10 years until one day they just started talking again, like nothing happened, and kind of blew everyone away, like, oh my God, they're talking. And it sounds like the reason for that initial falling out was that normally like the way things were handled in his house was like if you stepped out of line, then you got like a whooping basically, which is, I know that like a lot of families operated like that back in the day, especially. So it's not that uncommon, but he basically like something happened. He was like 16 years old, but he truly believed he was in the right. He's like, no, I'm right. I'm not at fault. You're not going to whoop my ass because I'm right this time. And he basically said, I'm big enough now that like I could take you, Dad. So don't mess with me. And then that's what caused them to not speak for 10 years. And it's interesting just seeing that Sagittarius energy in that realm of like he basically stood up for himself, and that got him to get the silent treatment for a decade.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Fascinating. Well, in like that age, depending on exactly how old he was, his North Node return, since he's at the early degrees of Gemini, means that it would have gotten to Gemini by about his like 17th birthday. And so I mean, like, depending on exactly when that was, like him standing up for himself and like speaking his truth and that sort of thing, like making a stand for himself, like based on his own worth, his own self-respect, like that's very much the 10th house part of that North Node placement. Especially where the father is like tied to the 10th house as far as like divine fatherly energies, however that manifests, whether it's your actual dad or your cousin or your business partner or your husband or whatever, like lots of ways for that to play out. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that about his dad.
Yeah, interesting home life situation. Um, and then I mean also him as a father, like he had children from, I think he had 2 kids from his first marriage and then another 2 from his marriage to Nicole Brown. And I mean, like some of the theories about what happened, like some people think that his son from his first marriage is the one who actually like committed the murder and that OJ was just covering up for him. And part of that theory is that like there were these diaries found where like this kid had some really dark thoughts, had a lot of darkness going on in his head, and it just kind of makes me wonder like what that father son relationship was like. Like we know a little bit about what OJ's father was like, but what was OJ like as a father himself, that he, you know, I don't know, like it seemed like his son had some violent tendencies, and it wouldn't be surprising if that's something that kind of ran down the family line. Kind of apple didn't fall far from the tree sort of deal.
I did
So
not
there's
know any of
definitely
that.
there's some male rage going on here. Some
Well, and like
masculinity maybe.
this is a placement that always fascinates me, and he's got his Jupiter like right there on his IC. Um, and so that's the beginning of his 4th house falling in Scorpio. And I've talked to a few people with this placement, not a lot, but the textbook version says that this is like one of the hardest upbringings to go through is a Scorpio IC, because it evokes the full range of human emotions, like from day one, that's part of your home life, that's part of your early upbringing manifesting around you. And so, especially to have Jupiter, which expands whatever it touches, tells me that like his early life most likely had a lot of turmoil. And it's very interesting to me because sometimes these people, specifically Betty White, has this, and she says her childhood was lovely. I also had a client recently who has this, and she also said her childhood was lovely. And I was like, great, let me ask you some follow-up questions and dig into how, like, what? Because that's not what the textbook says. And as we dug, it's like, oh no, there was loss, there was hard stuff, there was this, there was this. But my mom, like, we faced it and we talked about it and we cried about it and we prayed about it. And like it sounds like her mom just taught her how to actually move through those difficult things that manifested in early life. Um, so yeah, it's like there's definitely a broad range of emotions, which includes emotional pain. And when you go through that as a child, like it really depends on your parents. Like, are you getting the support to figure out how to manage that stuff or not? And
uh, that's
yeah.
another really interesting thing that in my research that I learned about OJ is that his parents, their marriage didn't work out. They split up when he was pretty young, I think, and he had a few siblings. And but I guess that they remained friends. Basically their whole thing was that like we brought children into this world, and even though our relationship didn't work out, like we're going to be here for the kids. And he was saying obviously what most kids want is for mom and dad to like be under the same roof and to be together, but if that's not going to happen, then at least mom and dad get along and they're both here for us, and we know that.
Mhm.
So despite having a more difficult relationship with his dad, which I don't even know if it was difficult, it was more of like an authoritarian, like standing up to like the man kind of thing. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because like divorce is like a difficult experience that a lot of people go through, like having their parents divorced. but how it's handled and like the aftermath of that is kind of like the biggest make or break moment. And it
Yeah.
sounds like that was actually pretty positive for the most part. I mean, this is just like what he's said, so we don't really like know, but from what he's said, it sounds like it was a pretty like ideal outcome in terms
Yeah.
of your parents getting divorced.
Well, and I think there's almost like just a disillusionment that happens in childhood with the Scorpio IC, where you just don't get to believe in fairy tales because you're living something that proves that's not real, that you experience real life very early on. And that's exactly what my client here recently said, was that her parents got divorced when she was like 3.5 and her dad died when she was in high school. And like, it was just like that kind of stuff that like happens in life. And it's like we can't ever hide from those things, but they seem to be especially located in childhood when you have this Scorpio IC. Plus, Jupiter in Scorpio just in general tends to attract these experiences of like really intense emotions. So, I mean, his intensity, plus it's like at that bottom part of the chart where like that's almost like our root, like very unconscious energy, very private, tender energy, and it's intense. Like, yeah, that's a lot to have like in your core, you know, that doesn't sound chill. That doesn't sound very peaceful, you know.
Definitely not. Yeah, that coupled with, I don't know, what do you think about all of this Cancer energy where that's all kind of concentrated? And I mean, that's the fourth house is like Cancer.
Right.
And so they have
Yeah.
all this going on up there. Like, I don't know, what do you think about
Got Venus and the Sun and Mercury all in Cancer. Plus, this one is Uranus. Whoops. Uranus in Gemini, but also falling in his 11th house.
right? Yeah, and that's just barely on the borderline there. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it comes pretty close, but wow.
Which
And
is the
that's
house of Aquarius. And that's like his descendant, which we were also just talking about how like hidden that is in us, our descendant energy. And yet he's got all this Cancer energy going on up here in this 11th house. So yeah, it's
I think some of the dark side in like from what I've learned about Cancer energy, some of the dark side of that can be like possessiveness and jealousy and being
that's
like having
Scorpio
those.
too, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's just interesting because of like the whole situation with his ex-wife Nicole Brown, who I think he killed her, but I think OJ did it. But like there were at least 8 911 calls from from her to police when he was like, there's documented evidence that he was abusing her.
Yeah.
And a lot of his reasoning, or a lot of the things that he said about her, like he was extremely jealous and extremely possessive even after they had divorced. He was like very concerned about what she was doing with other men and like wanted to punish her for it. And it's very interesting. I can kind of see that as like a dark side of Cancer, where I mean, maybe the love when it was great, when it was good, was really big and like really grand and nice. And I don't know, on the other side of that was like scary possessiveness.
Yeah. Well, and like this water, like look at this Jupiter. It's like up here to the moon. It's got all of this 5 different aspects coming off of it to everything going on over here. And then you also have Chiron. And then like all of that is this big grand trine with like all of his water. So yeah, I mean, it feels like the shadow of water in general is that, I mean, emotions can grow into feeling like they have a life of their own, to
Yes.
where you're doing shit that you don't recognize yourself. It's like you're hanging upside down, like on top of your body. And like, who is this person that's doing these crazy psycho things?
Yeah.
And I've had dissociative like episodes like that where it's like you're in it and there's emotions fueling it and it's a runaway train. It's not me. And
Yeah.
so how the hell do you stop yourself? Like thankfully mine never escalated to like that level of violence, but and I'm not saying like he's capable, but he's not the first football player to show like aggressive behavior. And again, if you take the murders completely out of it, his history of domestic violence with her is very telling all by itself. um yeah, so it's like he's got some impulse control issues at the very least, and that absolutely I think fits in with the shadow side of water, that those emotions, they can feel so strong and so present and so like you're a victim to them. I used to feel that way, that I was just a victim to these powerful emotions and I'll never escape this. But yeah, when you're rocking this much water energy, it's like you better have emotion management like on speed dial. And I don't know that he does. Plus all the football, all the head injuries
Yeah.
that, I don't know, I didn't research it or anything, but my goodness, like football players and their chronic head injuries, like that's not
Not good.
good for a human. So yeah, especially impulse control. And so if you have these crazy emotions and no impulse control, it's not a great combination.
Wow. There's this book that was written that's from transcripts from basically from interviewing him, and it's eerily similar to Ted Bundy, but how they basically like they asked him, well, if you did do it, what would you have done? And then you kind of are stroking their ego, and then they basically just tell you exactly what they did. There's a whole book called If I Did It, and it's everything OJ said from his interviews, like in prison, um, where he's saying, well, I didn't do it, but if I did, I would have done this. And so I was listening to this, and it's like what you described. Like he was basically describing the time of the actual murder and how he explains like a dissociative state of like he got really, really angry, and then all of a sudden, next thing he knows, he's like covered in blood and like he's like, who did this, what happened? And of course this is like, he keeps saying like, this is hypothetical, this is hypothetical. It's like, oh, it doesn't really sound very hypothetical, but
Right. Sure.
but he's like, it's just interesting to me that like that's pretty much what he described as happening, was having this dissociative episode of like rage took over, the emotions took over, and that he went over there in the first place because somebody had informed him about some like promiscuous thing that Nicole had done, and he was very upset about it, even though they're not together anymore, they're divorced. He kind of uses the guise of like protecting his children, even though he doesn't really seem to care about them all that much in any other context. Like he's like, why would you bring a guy over when the kids are upstairs asleep? Like he's very upset about that. And so he's like, I'm gonna just show up, even though he's like being a creepy stalker and like showing up at her house. And it's like, well, that's not great. Like the kids are upstairs sleeping.
Well, and that's definitely, again, not to like hammer on water energy, but that's the shadow side of water energy, that you're not making any sense. You're not being rational. Like, this is your ex-wife. This is none of your business. Like, in a logical, on paper way, this does not add up. And yet he's freaking over there, like doing things that should, that doesn't even make sense. So yeah, that makes a lot of
especially
sense, that it would just run away from him. Not that that's any excuse. But again, that's where I go back to like the constant head injuries that football players incur, and how, if you're any kind of true crime fan, that head injuries go right hand in hand with serial killers. It's like a thing. They all had head trauma there at some point. So
trauma
yeah.
and mommy issues, it seems, is a common thread. But it's also interesting that his north node in Gemini is like, here's an air sign, like all about logic and rationale and reasoning.
Mm,
And it seems like, I
yeah.
mean, I associate air energy with like our mental processes. And even though it looks like his Mercury is a water sign, but Well, actually, but it's in the 11th house. So then again, that's Aquarius. There's air energy. And
Yeah.
like his mental processes were legitimately damaged, like head injuries. Hello, you know, scary head injuries like this. And I'm pretty sure this marriage, this came, I mean, I think that Nicole Brown was significantly younger than him, but this is like well after his football career is done. He's not playing football anymore. And that's kind of when these injuries start. Like, I'm sure there were a lot of signs already, but things probably just escalated and it gets like increasingly worse as you age, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Which that's okay. So we were going to look at some transit dates.
Mm-hmm.
What, let's just do the date of the murders, because that was like, and then the next day was that first time that he had the handcuffs put on him.
Right. So it's like June 12th, 94. I really missed out. This all happened before I was born.
Well, I don't remember it much. So there we go. So these are the transits or the planetary placements at the time of June 12th, 1994, which is when the murders took place, and that when the police went to notify him that his ex-wife had passed, that's when they found the evidence at his house and he became a suspect and all of that. So the first thing I'm noticing is all of this
Wowee.
energy in Cancer that's like lined up so much with his energy. The sun is also in his 10th house. The south node is also in his 10th house, and the 10th house being of like our front facing self, our reputation, and all of that. He was also about to have his Jupiter return. So that like intensity, Jupiter in Scorpio is like emotional intensity. And so when you have your Jupiter return, it's like a big, intense experience of whatever your Jupiter is all about. And wow. So he would have been like more going through the trial at that point, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right around then, anyway.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's like there's a lot going on down there by that IC in Scorpio. And like
Mhm.
you said, that's like a really intense placement.
Pluto was in Scorpio at that time. Basically, Pluto's like this one all the way out here. So it had already been over his IC probably a few years before, but that would line up more with maybe the end of their marriage or something like that that happened where they were separating. And like her friend said, they were the most together divorced people she'd ever met or something like that, like the most not separated divorced people.
Wow.
But yeah, it was just like a process of disentangling themselves that it just wasn't ever over, it sounds like, which at the time of her murder, I mean, Pluto was still transiting in Scorpio.
Yeah, she was
I
pretty
also
afraid.
want to see when he was acquitted. Look at the Mars is like right there.
Ooh. Wow, that's interesting.
That is because like that Mars moves like 1 degree every 2 days. Yeah, because it spends like 2 months per sign. So it's only 1 degree off here. So that means like what, a
Day.
day later, two
Yeah.
days later, it was like exact. Just before that, it would have been exact with his Jupiter.
Wow.
All this in Libra with his Neptune. The sun is almost exactly with his Neptune, and Neptune represents our spiritual path. So him getting acquitted after all that, I have to imagine even he was surprised. I don't know. I can't believe it happened.
And then this is
After everything, they went from a slam dunk to he's acquitted. Like
so shocking. And it's
crazy.
interesting because so this is a pretty good like concentration of energy in Libra. And that's for the whole collective, right? At the time,
Yes.
this Libra energy. And I know that there was a lot of like, you know, with like the Rodney King situation and like all the LAPD stuff, like a lot of the police brutality issues were coming to light. And so
Yeah.
for many people, this was seen as an act of justice, you know, that he was acquitted because they didn't think he did it. They thought that
The LAPD had
another
railroaded
attack
him,
on
basically.
Black people and like on, you know, from the LAPD, from police in general. So for a lot of people, this was justice being
Yeah.
served.
Yeah.
And maybe on a
Which
big
is,
scale it was. I mean, I don't know. We obviously still have a lot of issues in that department, but it's just interesting for that to come to light. And that was one of the final, I don't know, one of the guys on his case was like, that's like what he did was he fought cases against that were like, you know, police brutality. That was his thing, was that he served justice to people who were victims of police brutality. And
was
he's
that
the
Johnny Cochran?
is that his
Or-
that is that what his name was? The one who said if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit or whatever,
Yes.
whatever it was he
Yes.
said. Yeah, that guy. He was like an advocate for racial justice. I mean, that's what he was ultimately fighting for.
It's just so interesting because, yeah, I mean, you do have all of this energy, which looks really positive until you get up to here and you got Chiron
Yeah.
in Libra. And that to me almost looks like the broken parts of the system like coming to the surface. And it seems like there were so many people who thought he was flat out innocent, that he's being set up by the police, that the acquittal, you're exactly right, was like the right thing. And then at the same time, like there were just as many people, I'll bet, that were convinced that he did it and it's not the right thing. And so just in general, like where Libra wants to bring people together and harmonize and all of that, I mean, like the acquittal was very divisive, I think, in
Very
general. Like either, yeah, you were mad at the police and you were happy he got off, or you were mad that he got away with it. And like, WTF is wrong with this system, that, I mean, the evidence could be so stacked up and yet
a little
it
bit of
didn't add
fame.
up to a conviction.
Yeah, like the way
Right?
they treat famous people and how differently he was treated. I mean, like it's great. It's obviously a good thing that there was not police brutality and like that's not something that happened here in this case. But I mean, there was the kind of another side of
Yeah.
our like the flaws in our justice system where the famous person gets treated differently,
Yeah.
more favorably, even
Which
their murder suspect.
still feels like Chiron in Libra. Like, yeah. Is that justice? Is that really helping? Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, hindsight's always 2020, and it's easy to sit here and look back almost 20 years and be like, here's what we think it all meant. But being in it, I know it was, so much more complicated because, like you said, like the timing of it was very, very charged. I mean, it still is, but at that time, especially in LA, like it was extremely recent that the whole Rodney King awfulness had taken place. So, yeah. I wonder when he actually got convicted of the armed robbery, because those were consequences that caught up with him. Because he wasn't quite so slippery that time.
No.
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 No way. The last time he was tried and decided, the sun was also on his Neptune, I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna have to put it back real quick.
Right. I think
so this one is the October 3rd, 2008, and was it 95? What was the date in 95?
Oh, now I forgot already. Let me see. October 3rd.
It's the same day?
Wait. Oh my God, really? October 3rd. Yeah.
it was already on October 3rd. And I was like, how'd that get there?
Like, was
Because
that
it was October 3rd, 95, and it was October 3rd, 2008,
that
the
kind of
dates of his
crazy?
trials being decided. Because I'm telling you, it was both times the sun was right on his Neptune.
Literally same day.
So here's transits for October 3rd, 1995, the
October is
sun on his
not a good time
Neptune.
for OJ.
And then October 3rd, 2008, the sun just passed his Neptune.
Oh my God.
That's insane that both happened on October 3rd.
Wow. And this is all happening in Libra too. This, which is, justice. All about justice.
Well, and he also had the South Node coming up. So, like, by the time he was being sentenced, it would have been coming up to here. So, the South Node transiting his Pluto and his Saturn as he was going into prison, which makes a lot more sense in terms of consequences actually sticking to him that time. He also has Uranus over here. Uranus moves very slowly and it's in retrograde here, which means it would have been up a little further. So he's got Uranus working on his moon over here at the time that he gets convicted. So that means like his first couple years in jail probably sucked. Uranus on your moon, that's lots of sudden like emotional things bursting forward for you to deal with, mostly what you've buried up until that point.
Wow.
And then you also got both of these down here, like all up on his Scorpio business. So yeah.
Yes. So I imagine that's a sore spot for him. Like this is really dredging up the deepest of deep that he contains.
So another thing I'm just realizing, because 2008, early 2008 was when Pluto very first stepped into Capricorn for like just a few months at early 2008. And then it went back to Sagittarius and then it came back at the end of 2008. So like here, it's like 6 weeks away from re-entering Capricorn. But I would be very interested to know, like this was when the trial was decided. Like, did everything come out, like at the beginning of 2008 when Pluto entered Capricorn? Because that was supposed to be like corruption in high places coming to light, like things that are broken, systemic under the surface, like being brought to justice, like having consequences. Let's rebuild, let's call these things out. Yeah. And yeah. How did you say that what was he stealing when he got arrested for the armed robbery? How'd that go?
He was stealing back his own sports memorabilia that he had to sell because he lost the civil case for the murder. Lost the civil case, he owed money to the families, and he had to sell off some of his precious sports memorabilia to gather up the money to pay it, and he tried to steal it back, and that's ultimately what landed him in jail.
Which just like that's why I'm like, I want to see when these consequences actually caught up to him, because the mentality that decides to do all of that is like, wow, you just got to sit back. And some people, that's where the brain trauma makes a lot of sense, like it all makes more sense if you can give him that credit of, yeah, I mean, the football didn't do you any favors.
Definitely not, especially not back in, like, we know a lot more now, and we still I'm sure we could be doing more to protect athletes, but especially in the time when he was playing football, they didn't know any of that. Like they did not know.
No, because that was like 50 years ago that he was playing football.
Yeah. They were probably not like prioritizing brain safety. I don't think. I mean, not that it excuses anything, but it definitely gives a layer of context that I think can really go a long way in this case.
Yeah.
And then there are like more current examples like Aaron Hernandez that there's, they've made a lot of documentaries and things about him and just what, like, I mean, I think he killed his wife or something. I mean, it's really scary, like what can happen when athletes suffer these continuous head traumas. He definitely had a lot going on emotionally, which is interesting to think about. Like,
especially a male born in the 40s to
Oh my
be so tender on the inside just wasn't, that's not a thing. You're not going to be that person on the outside. So
definitely not.
yeah, to have to like, especially with the Leo rising, like not to lump everybody with Leo rising into the same boat, but there's definitely a performative nature where it's not that it's inauthentic, it's just you're lighting up the room, you know, like you're presenting. And again, like if you have all that emotion inside of you, like, and you feel like you have to be the bright sunshine for the whole world, that's just that much more like keeping it in and not dealing with it in a healthy way so it doesn't erupt in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, and that's part of what like was so, this is like what people loved about OJ and why it was so shocking when all of this happened, was that he had such a pristine reputation, and like he was very beloved. His face was very well known. He was in like a lot of commercials and
Like movies and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's like, I mean, I would imagine that the like it, because before this it kind of was starting to come to light that he was like a domestic abuser, and that's pretty damning for your reputation, but murder
It
really
should
takes it
be.
up a notch. Yeah, and I think that was also like, that was not quite as publicized. This whole situation was obviously extremely publicized, and that's kind of a whole other conversation of like, is that something that should happen? Like, should we publicize this kind of stuff like it's a movie? I mean, I think I described it as like during the car chase that happened. I mean, the way they put that on TV, there were people out there with signs like it was like Beatlemania,
Yeah.
like go OJ. And it's like, we're talking about like a criminal, or not a criminal, a suspect in a murder case escaping, like trying to get away, but he's a celebrity. So like, should we treat it that way? I don't know. I don't know, that's a whole other conversation for probably another
Right.
time. But then that like that Leo rising is just, his public reputation being what it was made it all the more shocking, everything that was going on. What a contrast.
Well, because I think Leo risings are most generally really well liked.
Yeah,
I feel like especially the Leo rising Taurus midheavens, like they're just very loving, peaceful creatures to be around, whether they feel that way on the inside or not. They tend to be very good at keeping their insides to themselves and like putting on whatever vibe they want to send out into the world. So yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's very disillusioning, but probably again, like that's for the best. Like he's got a lot of planets in this quadrant up here, on the top on the left. So like the 10th, 11th, and 12th houses. And that's definitely where our existence begins impacting the collective. Like it's really ties it all together, like where our ripple effects go out and impact other people. And so it just, he's a very public figure. So, and like his path seems to be like, I mean, it's like pop culture at this point, like the white Bronco, the car chase, like that's like, what's the word? Icon something. Yeah, memorialized and part of our culture now. And it's almost like a joke. But yeah, to your point, like it's not really a joke. But his experience is so present in the collective. And yeah, it's almost a cautionary tale at this point.
definitely. And I mean, honestly, even part of like the fame of the Kardashians has a root in this situation. Like the name
Yeah.
Robert Kardashian, even though he was like good friends with OJ, that's mostly what their relationship was a friendship. And then he ended up like, I don't know what the word is, but like he like had an expired I don't know, law license, whatever that's called when you practice law, and then he got it like re-upped. That's not the right word, but he got it back so that he could be on OJ's trial, but that's just because they were good friends. So
Yeah.
like, Robert Kardashian, not a name that people knew, really, not really, until this situation. And
Which is
obviously
just,
that's a pretty well-known name now. So
yeah, that's definitely interesting to think about. And those girls, like the Kardashian girls whose dad became famous because of this. And then plus later on, their mom definitely became more famous when Bruce transitioned to be Caitlyn. So it's like these people who are up close to them in their lives, it just be interesting to look and see like what's going on in their natal chart, because it's almost like they were going to be famous no matter what. Like there was going to be some kind of scandal slash drama, not that Bruce transitioning to Caitlyn is drama, but it's like somebody else's things that brought attention to them. I've never looked at Kim Kardashian's chart or the other ones, but yeah, that would be interesting to do sometime.
Because that's like one of the common, I guess, like complaints. I really have nothing to say about the Kardashians. Like I'm not a fan and I don't know that much about them, but that is definitely something people say is like, well, what do they even do? Like they just are rich and famous and that's it. And it's like, I mean, you know, people will say like, oh, they're business people, you know, and it's like, there's a lot of business people who aren't them and they aren't that famous, but you know, a lot of it is the people they're associated with. So very interesting. That definitely has a root here in this situation.
That's that.
Kind of spooky.
What
happened? The being the same date in the same like Neptune Sun conjunction.
Yeah. Like, what are the chances of that? And it's like such the same thing. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, he's slippery. He slipped through last time based on other people's shit that was all the dust was in the air and he got through. Yep. And then the second time, which was because he owed money from the first time and did some shady shit to try to pay that back. And now the second time is also October 3rd.
Yeah.
What are the chances? Like, this is the tagline for astrology. You can't make this shit up.
Literally. Okay. So the second time when he actually gets arrested, it's like he's trying to pull the same shit of I'm gonna like pay the price without really paying the price, you know, like I'm gonna sell my stuff to get the money to pay the people, but I'm gonna steal it back, so I never actually lost it in the first place.
Right. Like if he could have, I mean, he had the choice at that point. He had like what amounted to a close call. He was freaking in jail on trial for murder, and then he got to go home. He got just to get out of there and just be done with that. And he could have like lived out the rest of his life, gotten himself a couple nice therapists, worked on his shit. He could have like healed and had his freedom forever. And instead, like you said, he's like repeating the same patterns. And that's why like the Neptune, the spiritual path in Libra, for him to have these run-ins with the legal system in general is very interesting, that his spiritual path is through that Libra energy. So, and like thinking you can get away with shit and like just blatantly just not follow the rules and think you're going to do that time and time and time again. And karma doesn't work like that. No. You were lucky to get through the first time and you should have cleaned up your act and you didn't. And now there's consequences. And Lord only knows, like, I mean, he's not even gone yet. Like, we don't even know where the OJ Simpson story ends. Like, it's not over yet. So who the hell knows what he's got going on? October 3rd, I'll be keeping my eye out for OJ.
Definitely. That's not his lucky day. Well, actually, it has been.
It sounds like it could go either way.
It can go either way, yeah. It's a big day for sure, regardless.